Today our focus is on local food in Nashville, and our speakers are Andrew Park, who is a senior at Vanderbilt's University's program in human organizational development. He is also an intern here at the Design Center, and we've been working together the past month and a half on lots of different topics. Andrew's really excited about this and sort of identified this as an area that he was really interested in when he started here. He also lives in a sort of gardening community in North Nashville, which he'll tell you more about in his presentation. And our next speaker is Delvin from Delvin Farms, and she is also the president of the Tennessee Organic Growers Association and lives on a beautiful farm that we're going to see images of and to find out more about. And also Sarah Bellows, who I believe is not, oh, Sarah, okay. Hey, Sarah. Sarah is with Nashville Harvest, and she's a co-founder of that organization. It's a nonprofit focused on promoting sustainable agriculture and increasing food security. So thank you to all our speakers, and Andrew, you're up first.
Great, hi. So as Gary mentioned, my name is Andrew Park, and just as a disclaimer, I'll say that I'm sort of fresh meat, I'm sort of a newbie to this whole local eating, sustainable living world, but I think what I can bring is exactly like a newbie's perspective on how local food manifests here in Nashville. And at Peabody College, which is the school I go to right now, my course of study is focused on human and organizational development, specifically community development. And after taking so many classes on urban affairs, and health-related interventions, and community studies, I couldn't help but notice how frequently food systems were neglected from our public discourse. And as a society, I think we ignore something that's really so fundamental as the food we put in our bodies.
In here.
In there. So to get us started, here are just a couple points that we're going to run through. And as a starting point, here's an idea that was championed by a couple, and their name is Alyssa Smith and J.B. McKinnon, and it's called the 100-mile diet. And the idea here is that an individual should be able to manage a diet in which 100% of their food products come from a 100-mile radius of where he or she lives. And I think as a starting point, there's some merits to this model. First of all, it really makes us look at the immediate environment around each one of us. And I think it forces us to really look at our food systems on a smaller scale, on a more local scale. Also, I think looking at local food through this model kind of helps us to really be more concerned about the policy issues that are going on around us. For example, if your food is coming in this 100-mile radius, then you're more likely to be concerned about things, for example, like open space preservation, or you might be more concerned about just like general zoning ordinances. At the same time, I think that we don't necessarily want to be constrained by this model. All right, and just as a starting point, here's some facts that you can kind of glaze over. But as these trends kind of indicate, the push for local food has, I think it's not just a fad anymore. I think it's something that people are really being serious about. And as you can see, it's actually been institutionalized as a word. So the new American Oxford Dictionary, actually, that was their word of the year. It was locavore, which is pretty interesting. And as you can see in that second point, there's been a huge increase over the past 10 years, 10, 15 years, in what people want from their food systems. At the same time, you can see that there are a number of costs that are associated with the industrial food production system that probably the majority of us still get most of our food through that system. And I think even at this point, through all the research that I've done, it's still pretty shocking to me how much petroleum is a part of our agriculture system. And there's that saying, you are what you eat, and if that's true, I mean, we're a bunch of oil-eating people. I mean, and I'm not just talking about the transportation costs that are involved. the actual chemicals, the fertilizers that go in the ground, they're made from petroleum, which is pretty shocking when you think about it. And with the growth of local food markets, you kind of see the word local being used interchangeably with, correctly and incorrectly with other words, just organic and sustainable. And I think this confusion occurs because at the end of the day, our food system is still very, very, very complex. And I think when we hear questions, I think just thinking about these words, there are certain things that come to mind for me at least. Questions such as, like, should we avoid pesticides at all costs, or should we help small local farmers in our immediate environment? Should we help them grow their food? Should we reduce like food shipment miles, or should we buy food produced in a sustainable, organic manner wherever it's from? And I think these questions come up fundamentally because at the heart of it, we all want to do what's right. We want to eat what's right. We want to help local food markets as much as possible. Here's just, I actually borrowed this from a chart that was specifically about urban agriculture, but I kind of tuned it to what we're talking about today. But as you can see, I think there really are multiple, eating locally has multi-dimensional benefits. Go around the circle there. But standing here today, I'm not pretending to be an unbiased voice about this. I think I'm very passionate about this, and I think for me the benefits of eating locally really outweigh the costs. And I think with this whole new culture that surrounds local eating, it still is it's not very well defined. Organic, for example, to grow certified organic food, there are certain regulations that you need to follow. There are certain institutions that you need to be working with. With local food, it's not so much the case. But ultimately, I think that there are certain points that all local growers kind of advocate for. Local eaters, for example, value quality. They demand that their food be safe and flavorful. At the same time, they want their food produced in a way that respects the natural environment. They want food that reflects sustainability. And to some degree, they're willing to compromise on things such as cosmetic appearance and price and convenience to support a system that really gives food integrity, I guess. And finally, I think local eaters also want their food to be produced in a system that respects people. So that's including farmers and the workers and also us consumers. All right, so I'll kind of let you guys sit on this. I thought this was probably one of the better definitions of local food. It does mention that sustainable aspect that I think is very, very important. And like I said, I think this definition also gives a very multi-dimensional, it shows the multi-dimensional benefits of local eating. So, in preparing for this talk, I actually thought a lot about what got me excited and what brought me actually to this point today where I'm talking to you guys about local food. And just looking back at my life, one of the most striking moments for me was spending a couple years in Schwenksville, Pennsylvania, which is where my father attended seminary. And at school, and this is when I was in first or second grade, lunch was first of all hot, and from what I can remember, really, really good. And secondly, and I didn't think of it much then, but all of our milk was actually bought in hard plastic bottles from farmers on the street. And at the end of the lunch line, it was actually my friend's dad, his name was Sam. He would be there during the whole lunch hour, and there would be 3 stacks. So it would be strawberry, chocolate, and just regular milk. And what you would do is you would get at the end of the line. At the end of the lunch hour, you would take your bottles back to the farmer, and what they would do is they would sterilize the bottles, take it back to the farms, and bring milk back the next day. And I really, really didn't think much about it back then, but when I think about it now and just the state of how kids eat in schools nowadays, this was a pretty striking moment for me. And I think it's just an incredible idea that you can, it's not that incredible at all. It's actually very, very, very simple, but the idea that that your milk is coming from down the road is something that's very, very disturbing. And I think another thing that really, really shaped my interest in this is having grandparents who come from immigrant backgrounds. Wherever we live, my grandparents have been prolific gardeners, and they've grown things from squash to pears and all zucchini, perilla, like all these random plants. But I think this resourcefulness and this idea of sustaining yourself through your diet, I think, is something that's really, really admirable. And I've lived in 7 different states at this point, and through all the churches that my father has served, everyone at church grows their own food. And I think it's something that isn't really questioned, it's just you do it. You grow your own food. I think a lot of people probably at my church think there's no point in buying food when you can just grow it yourself. And I think it's that resourcefulness and self-sustaining mentality that I think is really, really admirable. All right, so you might be wondering how today I'm involved in local food production here in Nashville. And since May, I've been living in a gardening community in North Nashville called Nashville Greenlands. And we're over on Highland Street, but we're comprised of 15 individuals living amongst 4 semi-autonomous houses. And in return for low rent, we each contribute about 20 hours of gardening or building maintenance work a month. We have about 1 acre of arable land. And the mission of our community is to explore and demonstrate an ecologically sustainable way of life within an urban setting based on agricultural use of open land and a simple common life to minimize our consumption of world resources. Now, when I first moved into the community, I was definitely an eager beaver about the whole local food business. I think I had this idea that it was going to be easy. Quickly though, I learned how much work and sweat it really takes to sustain such an endeavor. I mean, just like to show how fresh I was to this, I didn't even know what a chigger was. And I found out when I woke up one morning and I was just covered in red dots everywhere, and I thought I had shingles or something. So, I mean, there really is just a tremendous amount of work involved. And I guess my point here is that devoting time to producing your own food is a lot of work. Let me see here. There we go. All right, so our co-housing kind of setup is led by Carl Meyer, who I kind of paparazzi in the morning while he's sitting there on his porch. But this is a guy who has really, really, really devoted his whole life. He walks the talk, he talks the talk. And not to be, I mean, I'm not trying to be ageist or anything, but Carl was born in 1937, so he's 73 years old, and I think every day, everyone at the community is just so surprised because this is something that's so ingrained in the way he lives that just like his stamina is absolutely mind-blowing. Like we'll all be working as a community for like an hour and a half, like maybe 2 hours outside, and we're dying, and Carl hasn't even broken a sweat, and he just keeps chugging on. And I think, relating back to this, I think Carl has really shown me that eating locally, sustainably, or organically are ideas that really coexist well together. On top of that, I think that the Greenlands has shown me that local eating is something that is actually probably a symptom of greater change in your lifestyle. It's not just about local eating. Just like, even now when I'm at the Greenlands, I feel extremely guilty like when I have to drive. And I know that it's not something that I think I was brought up to believe. But I guess it comes back to those questions again, where like if you're going to be driving 60 miles a day but you're eating locally, all your food is growing in your yard, is that sustainable living? And I would say probably not. And similarly, if you're growing locally but your garbage is like the size of the municipal auditorium, I'm not sure if that's sustainable living either. So the point here, I think, is that local eating really is just a sign of a bigger change in your lifestyle. Alright, oh yeah, here's just a couple pics that I got from the garden. We grow a tremendous amount of food, and I was just telling people just at the Civic Design Center, but I rarely eat meat anymore, and it's not a choice I've made, it's just a matter of the circumstance. There's no need for me to buy meat because everything I eat literally comes from the garden, which is pretty awesome. So here's just a few kind of points on that. All right. All right. So just to kind of close off, I think that as individuals, there are certain steps that we can do to support just the wider ideas of the local food movement. And I think a tremendous opportunity, in my opinion, is just gardening in your own backyard. I mean, there are a few ways to be more local than to be growing food in your yard. I mean, when you get down to it. And I think my personal belief is that everyone should try his or her hand at growing food. And in the next, like all the slides probably till the end, all these are actually people in Nashville that I kind of scoped out and took pictures of their yard. So this is one of my fellow interns, Jason. That's his backyard, which is pretty incredible. And I just wanted to kind of take a little bit of time to talk about this one property that I experienced. Over on the right, that brick building, right, that's Brimey's, so, or the basement. So this is over on 8th. And as you can see, just from the front yard, this lady who lives there, I actually knocked on her door and kind of wanted to talk to her, but she is 75, and she did this whole yard by herself. And all of this is just covered in food. All 4 sides of her house, she has no yard. All of it is just food. So, like, she has a little plum tree in the back. Like, she has squash just like growing onto like the streets, basically. And there's peppers on the side. And I think what she demonstrated to me was that, yeah, I mean, growing food is definitely, it's not an easy breezy task, but at the same time, just as I was talking to her, she was just expressing how, she said within her own, the context of her own life, like how she doesn't go grocery shopping, and she doesn't, and she's able to walk, and she gives food to people at her church, and things like that. And I think, as I was mentioning earlier, just local eating is kind of a bigger indication of changes that are going on in your lifestyle. I think, I was just blown away. I think that's just one thing I kind of wanted to share with you guys. I mean, she really is, she's probably 5 feet, and she's frail, and she has a hunch in her back, but she gets her work done. And yeah, so this is actually Ron, who actually also works at the center, and he does a lot of crazy hydroponic things. But I think the whole point here is that each of us can, in some way, invest, whether that's from a raised bed or just a simple container or a pot that we can put in our house somewhere. I think we all have the means of taking the next step in advocating for local food. And especially thinking about community gardens and how people talk about community gardens have been kind of a hot thing these days. I think that a big opportunity is for people to learn these skills in their own yard and then to take those to community gardens. What I found, I mean, I've been to West Nashville Community Garden where Sarah works, and I think part of the challenge for me was that I felt like I didn't have the skills to really help out in the way that, as much as I could. So I would definitely recommend that you all in some way try and grow your own food. And I think another way to participate in the local food movement is to frequent those businesses, those farms, those markets that either grow local produce or sell local produce. So, I mean, an obvious example would be to buy a CSA share from Delvin Farms, or to volunteer at a space such as West Nashville Community Garden. But I just kind of wanted to leave you kind of at the end with just these ideas, just showing what individuals in Nashville are doing. This property is over on Wedgwood. I'm sure if you you go on the way to the fairgrounds, you'll see it on the right if you're driving that way. But just the efforts that people have put into this are pretty amazing. And to supplement the discussion we're having today, the National Civic Design Center has actually prepared a case study report on urban agriculture in Nashville. So if you want to get a copy of that, you can go to civicdesigncenter.org, and that's there. And just as a final word, I've always, this is specific to Cindy and also to Sarah, I've just been blown away by the amount of dedication that people who are involved in local food, how much they do that in Nashville. So I'm really, really excited actually to hear what you guys have to say too. So that's that. Thank you.
Delvin, and I am one of the owners of Delvin Farms. We are a true family farm. Years ago, my husband farmed on his family farm and paid his way through college. And so he would grow tomatoes in the summertime to get money to take me. And pay his way through college. And so it was his way of life. And I was a city girl, not too far from here. I lived in Germantown, so I'm back home again today. And after working in a position of, he worked on the futures market, buying and selling commodities, and so he could make $1 million in a second and lose $1 million in a second, and very high pressure. And he came home one day and said, you know, I don't like this. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And he said, I just really want to farm. And I said, well, then let's do it. And of course, my family said, oh my Lord, you're going to go broke. You can't farm. You're going, well, we're broke, but we're still farming. And we're still hitting the soil. And thankfully, our children were raised on the farm, and 2 of them have come back home to join the farm business there. And so it is a true family farm. Our daughter left a career in teaching to come back last year, and our son was an environmental consultant. He came home to the farm, and we have a hippie up in the Seattle area who is getting his doctorate in environmental science, and so we did raise environmentally conscious children. But we did. But anyway, we are a family farm, and as far as the local food is concerned, you know, I think that this has come more and more to the forefront just in the last few years. I don't think people were quite as conscious or cared about where their food came from as the environment that we have today. It just seems like this movement has come about in the last 10 years. Really, more and more people are so conscious of it that weren't in years past. And so I think that's an excellent ode to society today, that people do want to know what they're feeding their children and what they're putting into their bodies. On our farm, we are a certified organic farm, and so we are inspected yearly. Our financial records are gone over with a fine-tooth comb. We lay everything out on the table. Our soil is tested, our water is tested, and we do have surprise visits as well. And so when you say that you're certified organic, it truly does give the consumer the ability to know that their food is being grown in an environmentally conscious way, as well as a safer way, in our opinion. My husband graduated with a degree in agriculture, and of course he had been growing on the farm and paying his way through college growing by using methods that his grandfather and a dear friend of his, who could have been his grandfather, taught him to do. But when he graduated with a degree in agriculture, then they taught him that if it moved, you killed it. And so we farmed that way for a few years, and we said, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And so we were using sustainable methods and growing sustainably and doing all types of things for the environment. But we were still using those methods that you learned in college, and then we found out we don't really need to do that. And so years ago, we went with sustainable and organic agriculture before it was a buzzword, and we've been going that way ever since. On our farm, we use a lot of cover cropping, and this is how we fertilize our crops through natural methods, and one of them is winter rye and clover, and these are actually cover crops that will put nutrients into the soil as they're growing. Wheat and veg especially, veg is a nitrogen fixer that puts nitrogen into our soil. And so by using these cover crops, we're able to just come back in the spring, till those right back into the soil. Now this is doing several things for us. Not only has it put nutrients in the soil while it's growing, but when we till this back into the soil, and you can see how beautifully that turns under. And so all that green manure is turned under, and then that just provides, it brings in all the beneficial and the nematodes and brings everything in that we need under that soil to do the work for us. And that's a completely different subject, and I wish I had time to go in on that, but I could give you studies of and see the soil, how rich and black it is. And that's all strictly from natural means to produce a soil like that. We use a lot of compost on our farm, usually about 8 to 10 tons of compost a year. And we get our compost from horse farms and the horse beddings and so forth, and then we compost those for up to a year. And then after that, it's just nothing but good, rich soil. And so we use a lot of beds with raised beds of compost that is, we grow crops on that is going to come off quickly, like lettuces and onions and radishes and so forth. And we do a lot of intercropping. And let's see, this slide here, you can see in between the onions here, we actually have little lettuces and radishes planted, so that we'll pull the onions off and we'll leave the lettuce to grow and the radishes, and then all of that is just pulled as it matures. So we're able to get a lot of use out of the soil and out of the beds and out of the space. And then we also grow on mulch, and we use this on longer season crops that we're going to have for months at a time, like tomatoes and bell peppers and eggplants and things that are a long season. And what this is doing, and here again, environmentally conscious, we have drip irrigation under these beds. And so we're putting the water exactly where it needs to go. We're not watering the weeds. We're not creating runoff into our land and into the streams. And we're using a low amount of water this way. We do have large irrigation systems that are overhead irrigation systems that we use only if we absolutely have to. Those irrigation systems put out 500 gallons per minute. These do 35 gallons per minute and put the water exactly where we need it. So it's a more sustainable way of growing. It also helps us in weed control, because with organic production, there's a lot of handwork done. And so anything that we can do to help us minimize the type of work that we have to do and the weeding and things that we have to do, we're all for it. And it also keeps fruit clean, and this keeps disease down. So a lot of your disease on your strawberries and tomatoes come from the soil, and when that splashes back, then that creates disease, and then you have loss of your crop as well. So lots of reasons for growing the way that we grow. This is a strawberry crop. Everything with us is from seed to table. And we grow all of our plants starting in January in our greenhouses. They're all transplanted into our fields, and we transplant, and we actually start growing in January, and we're actually planting in the greenhouse. There are seeds being planted today in the greenhouse, getting ready for the fall crops. We have to think 3 months ahead of ourselves in order to get the crops produced. We also grow sunflowers as a cover crop. And not only does it add beauty to the farm, but it brings in the beneficials, and it brings in, and we have honeybees on our farm, so the honeybees benefit from this, and the bumblebees help pollinate our crops. So we plant sunflowers, and then our CSA members can sometimes get the sunflowers. They want the food first, so if we have time to give them sunflowers, we will. but the food comes first. We grow a lot of herbs, and I actually had the farm crew set these baskets out into the field so that I could take this picture, just to show the volume of the amount that we take out of the field each day. But we never leave these baskets in the field. Once the baskets are harvested, they're put onto our trucks that are covered. And then when the truck is at least 3/4 of the way full, it's driven back to our warehouse. We never leave vegetables in the field to compromise the integrity of the vitamins and the nutrients in the vegetables themselves. So they're brought back, they're not allowed to stay in the sun and wilt down and lose nutrient value. And so those are all brought back to the warehouse. We're trying diversity on our farm, and we grow 72 varieties of fruits and vegetables. And our son, when he joined us, started a mushroom operation. And the mushrooms are actually cut off of the logs, are oak logs. And we cut these logs off of our farm. And we have very little, we have a nice area that has trees and everything, but our farm is pretty clear. And so the wooded areas that we do have, we use very carefully. And so we cut the oak logs off of the farm. And then we use the trunk of the tree to build outbuildings on the farm, barns and pavilions and things of that nature. And then the canopy of the tree is used for the mushrooms. And shiitake mushrooms love oak, and red oak is their particular, very nice for shiitakes. And so we use the logs and we inoculate them with the mycelium in January. And then we let them stay for about 6 months to a year before we actually get a production off of it. But these logs will produce for about 5 years off of the same log. But everything on the tree is used. So the tree trunk is used for buildings, and the canopy is used for the shiitake mushrooms. And then any of the small branches we use for little campfires and things like that on the farm. We also have orchards, apples, peaches, pears, blue lights, plums, that will be producing in the next couple of years. We kind of put our cart before the horse, and we put the trees out first. And then after about 2 years, when the deer were enjoying the trees immensely, we thought, wait a minute, should we put up a fence, do you think? And so we did. We put up, but I didn't want fences that were intrusive, so we found something that was nice in our view. And so finally the peaches and the apples are able to have leaves on the tree. This is our shiitake logs, and that's the shiitake mushrooms. And this is a flush of mushrooms, and Liz is actually inoculating them back in January in our warehouse. And then once the logs start producing, we'll soak the logs for 24 hours in water and then pull them out. And 3 days later, you have the flush, which is the shiitake mushroom. And this is the young apple orchard, and I can tell you about that maybe sometime when we have a little more time, but we did everything wrong. With organic, and especially certified organic, in Tennessee, there isn't that much resource. There isn't enough inputs as far as doing organic production, because everything started up in California in the west and up in the northeast. And so we're getting there, but we don't have the type of inputs and the knowledge that we need with our universities and so forth now to give growers any type of information. So when we put in the orchard, we just read books and did everything that conventional growers were doing, but remember, we're organic, so we can't use the chemicals and things that they use. So we thought, well, cover cropping, we'll put the cover crops in. Everything we did was wrong. And so we provided a perfect living space for voles, because the heat was up to my chest. And so during the wintertime, and then we put the protective covers on the tree so that, you know, when we actually went through to plant things, we wouldn't damage the trees. We provided the perfect place for voles to live during the winter. They were in the tall grass so that the coyotes couldn't find them. And then they hid behind these little protective covers right here from the hawks. And so they were doing very nicely and destroyed about 300 of our trees. So everything with us is we learn by experience, and I'm a 4-H teacher as well. And so learn by doing is one of the slogans, and boy, have we been doing a lot of that. So, and we just have to make the mistakes, but we pass those mistakes on to other organic growers. And so we also build the beehives in the wintertime, and we have several honeybee hives on our farm to pollinate, and as well as getting honey from them. And marketing, and we're talking about local food. And as I was saying, about 10 years ago, I started getting all these people coming to us wanting to do school gardens and community gardens and so forth. And so we provide plants for many community gardens as well as several school gardens, and Pencil partner with several schools in order to provide them with materials for their gardens. And but we're also at farmers markets, which we never did before, because we just didn't feel that we had the time to put into farmers markets. But then people wanted local food, and we didn't have on-farm sales because the farm is just so extremely busy, and I like to talk a lot, so nothing would ever get done with people coming to the house all the time. And so we just didn't have it. And so then we started talking about local markets that were producer-only markets. And this means that when you go to the market, you're talking to the person who grew your food. And today, that is so important to people. And I was talking to Lisa over here earlier, and she was Lisa, and she was telling me about going to the farmer's market and not knowing too much about apples, but they were quite pricey. But the education and the care that she got at that farmer's market, and I don't mean to use education in that term, but just the care that the grower took to explain the difference in apples and everything, made her tell that story to us today, and she named the market, and it was the Nashville market. And so, word of mouth, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But when you go to a farmer's market and you're able to talk to the person who actually grew your food, and you know that it's growing in your area, and there are health benefits of buying locally grown food, because you're getting the pollen, that the bees have pollinated all the food that you're eating, so you get health benefits from that, and especially eating local honey. And there are many health benefits to eating locally grown as well. And so farmers markets are a great place to do that, and there are farmers markets popping up everywhere, and not because farmers want to be at these markets and have so much time to be there, it's because people are demanding it. And people are coming to the farmers and saying, please, I need a market in this area. And talk about food deserts. There's a new market in South Nashville now, right on Thompson Lane, and I heard that it's doing very, very well. And that was an area that I never thought a farmer's market would do well, because it's a very busy area, and it just didn't seem like people would slow down enough to go to a farmer's market, and especially care enough about a local grower to do so. But I've heard it's doing quite well. We also sell to all of the organic stores in the Nashville area, Whole Foods and Turnip Truck and Produce Place, and any of the local stores and all of the upscale restaurants in Nashville, as well as Opryland, Vanderbilt, and Taste. Germantown, we have a couple of restaurants in Germantown, City House. And another thing that we have is, we market through is our CSA. And CSA is Community Supported Agriculture. And this is a local movement that is actually a worldwide movement. It actually started in Japan. Let me know. It actually started in Japan about 30 years ago when Japanese women realized that the farmers were going out of business. So they went to the farmers and said, what's going on here? And they said, well, they're growing it. But of course the U.S. was shipping all types of food in. And so the farmers were going out of business. And so they said, you grow it and we'll buy it. And that was called Teikei, T-E-I-K-E-I. And that translates to putting the farmer's face on your food. And it moved from Japan to Europe, and then from Europe to the U.S., where it was renamed Community Supported Agriculture. And that's basically what it's doing. People who participate in CSAs know who their farmer is, they know their name, they know their family members, they know their stories, and farmers know their members. And you can't go anywhere without meeting one of your CSA members. I actually sneaked off the farm the other day, And I was supposed to be delivering to Whole Foods, and Amy, my daughter, was with me. And we were coming home, and there was a yard sale. We really wanted to go to the yard sale. But there was so much to do with the farm. And I said, okay, well, I need some baskets for the market, so maybe we can find some baskets. So we stopped, and sure enough, I bought a basket. But there were 3 people at that yard sale who were my CSA people who knew me and said, what are you doing off the farm on Friday? And I said, okay, you cannot tell this. You can't tell Hank I was off the farm going to a yard sale. So you just can't go anywhere. You know, you're going to get caught when you're where you're not supposed to be. But what I'm saying there is that it builds community. Community-supported agriculture builds community. It lets you know who your farmer is, and they sure know you. And then you have a bond that you never have when you're selling to large productions. We sold to produce houses for many, many years, and you never got any feedback. With CSA, you get the feedback, you get the stories, you get the family stories, you get the heart-tugging stories about health issues and everything, but you get to know your customers, and it's been a blessing to us. And CSA actually is a way of saving family farms. We have 800 families who participate in our CSA program. And when I had 100, I knew the names of our members and their children, and with 800, it's a little bit more difficult, but I sure do know the faces, and I may not be able to pull the name up, because I'm getting older too. I'm right up there with your little guy. But markets give great marketing outlets, and it gives that human touch to it as well. I never thought that I would enjoy markets as much as I do. It's absolutely exhausting, and when you come home, all you're going to do is cross somewhere that you don't have to talk to anyone. But while you're doing it, it is absolutely fantastic. And it's so good just having people come up to you and ask you about their food and how to prepare it. And you better know how to prepare your food, because that's all part of growing it. And if you can't tell someone what the name of a vegetable is or how to grow it, then they're going to suspect that you really didn't grow it. So you better be very knowledgeable. Sometimes when we have some of the younger girls working, or the younger guys working at our market, they get panic-stricken because I tell them, you know, on the farm, I'm out in the field with them, and I say, now this is called a Rosa Bianca. And when they come up to you, this is an heirloom eggplant. And when they come up to you, they're going to say, what is the name of this? And so sometimes when they get to the market, I can see the panic on their face, you know, like, oh, I forgot the name of this. So I always go over and say, okay, can I help you? And but it's all part of marketing, just like Lisa said. You know, when you go to a market and that farmer can talk to you and tell you what it is and how to grow it and what it tastes like, you're promoting Tennessee agriculture. And as president of Tennessee Organic Growers Association, that's what I'm constantly doing, is promoting Tennessee agriculture. Yes, and that 100-mile radius that Andrew was telling you about earlier, there's a book out by Jane Gossall, and it's called This Organic Life. And Jane is eating all local food, so all winter, if it isn't local, if she can't get it, then she's not going to have it in her diet. And it's a good book. I read it years ago, and I still remember. And she tugs at your heart with some of the trials that she goes through. But it's an excellent book on eating locally. And we have one couple who comes to the market who will buy nothing but local, and they spend tons of money with us. And I try to get them to buy it, like buy a whole box of this. You can buy a whole box for the same price that you're buying a few pounds off of the counter. No, we want to support the local farmer. Please, Chris, just let me sell it to you like this. I'm not going to do that. But they will eat only local food. And so they can, they freeze, they do everything, and then they're eating locally off of that food all winter long. So we're at several farmers markets now, and couldn't enjoy it more. That's one of, I think this was the East Nashville market a couple of years ago. And here's what just this picture. These are two babies, and can you imagine the conversation going on in this little baby talk, checking each other out? And I snap that picture, and I always tell my audience that these two babies are standing there checking each other out, And I'd love to know what's going through their head. But here is a mother here, and here's a mother here, and they're conversing. And so, and they're talking about the farmer's market, or they're talking about picking up their CSA box, and actually they were comparing recipes, and that's what CSA, and that's what local farmers markets do. It promotes community, it promotes local agriculture, it promotes local businesses, and your dollar stays in the area. And so you're just pulling that dollar, and it's just making a circle around the community when you buy local produce or local anything. And so best advertising is word of mouth. And your worst advertising can be word of mouth as well. So you better do your business right, and you better be able to serve your customer when they come to those markets. All right. So the CSA, you eat with the seasons. And so in the spring, you're going to have all the leafy greens and things, and then those give way to the summer heat vegetables. And then in the winter, all the greens are back again. These are actually pictures of our produce. And this is a spring share. And typical spring share with strawberries. And so you're eating with the seasons. You're eating what's in the field when we go out to harvest. We invite people to our farm in the spring so they can see where their food is being grown. And then they are actually bringing a covered dish and sharing and being a community in that way as well. And then, of course, the summer shares include watermelon and blackberries and things of that nature. This was the 4th of July share last year, and a little patriotic flag on there. They got sunflowers for this share that year, too. This is one of our largest pickup sites, and he's been eating tomatoes out of there. It's usually full. We have 10 locations, and this is a fall share right here. And then in the fall, we invite them back to the farm again for a picnic and hayride, and then the children get to go to the pumpkin patch. We also offer our members freezing and canning classes, again, building community, teaching them to spread that food dollar over the whole year instead of just the summer months. And my husband's a poster child for Tennessee Organic, and this is our family farm. Are there any questions?
Questions till the end, so we can ask them. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Bellows. Can you hear me okay? I volunteer with a group called Nashville Urban Harvest. We're a community farm in the Nations neighborhood in West Nashville. And we also do a couple other sort of food security and community food security, and also more social justice things around the food system in Nashville. And I would first like to thank Cindy and Andrew. You guys had really great presentations, and Cindy especially. I moved to Nashville in 2005, and since that time has been totally an inspiration for staying active in the food system and becoming active in the food system. I was lucky to go to college in a place in the Northeast where people were doing research in organics, and had that opportunity in the early 2000s when I was in college. But coming down here, it was really important to get connected to a community where we didn't have necessarily the more traditional academic institutions that would help facilitate that role in a different place. And so a lot of the way of experiencing becoming involved in the sustainable food system in Nashville really has been through more peer-to-peer, or really finding out what the farmers are doing right now. Unbeknownst to me, I knew that someone from Delvin Farms would be here. I knew it would be Cindy, but I was looking for photos of, we keep honeybees out at the community farm, and Hank Jr., Cindy's son, is in my photos because I actually, when I was learning about raising honeybees last year, got to go out to his to their farm and learn about it. Thanks. Perfect. So this slide is actually an old one from a presentation that I did in, I think, 2008 or 2007. But I thought it was interesting to use because the Time magazine picture on the front is from March 2007. And so I think that's sort of when we really felt like in Nashville there was a groundswell of people becoming way more interested, at least from a public consciousness perspective, of what, where to get local food and what it was. And all around that same time, the upper right-hand picture is also a picture of Delvin Farm stand, and then on the bottom left was one of the first meetings that we ever had. It was actually hosted with the Nashville Farmers Market, but joining chefs and farmers together for the first time. And now, I mean, at that point there were a lot of, some farmers like Delvin's who were selling to restaurants, but a lot of the restaurants said they wanted to be connected to local food, but how could it become, how could it be more easily facilitated? And so now, and it's been about 2 or 3 years, there have been a lot of different organizations throughout the Middle Tennessee area, from Toga to Slow Food, Nashville, to all of these groups, to all the farmers markets, helping to play that role. So I'm going to start mostly, which one do I get? Okay, good. Oh, that's really weird. I have a lot of photos, so we can go through it, but that's a picture of a community farm with folks volunteering. It came out a little strange. We are a volunteer-run organization, so we basically, the goal is to teach people to grow their own food or to take a more active role in their food system without having to know a whole lot about farming before they go into it. We do really love when people do know about farming when they come into it, but we have about 1.5 acre site in the Nations neighborhood in West Nashville where we grow a diversified vegetable crop mostly, and just decided last year to start putting in perennials. We don't own the land that we're on, and earlier this summer, well, in the spring, we actually almost lost the farm, the lot where we're growing on. The business that runs it, that had been allowing us to use it, went out of business, and so they found someone to rent the building, and they're continuing to let us grow there. So every Saturday morning we have volunteer sessions. Throughout this season, really, things are going on there, from winter meetings out at the farm, which is the picture on the right, to early spring, sort of laying the drip tape and the black leaves landscape fabric. These are just some more general shots of the farm. We collect rainwater off of the roof and also use drip irrigation, which is on a much smaller scale than it is at Delvin Farms, but really helps to conserve water so that we're not, we would be hooked up to the city water otherwise, which gets really expensive and also is chlorinated, so it's not that great for your crops. We have kind of school groups come out and also partner with the Veggie Project, which is a collaboration led by Vanderbilt Children's Hospitals and the Boys and Girls Club. So the goal is beyond just getting sort of adults or young adults or older generations involved in food, is especially to get kids involved in the food system and get their first touch in the soil that they haven't, and get to take home plants or get to take home vegetables that they played a role in growing. We have, this is a photo of this Hank Jr., Cindy's son, in the upper right-hand corner, and myself. We have one beehive out at the farm. This is a picture of the Veggie Project. We help organize farmers markets at the Boys and Girls Club, so we'll actually go and get produce from local farms, and the kids at the Boys and Girls Club will sell it to their neighbors and to their family. Here's some more shots of the farm, and for the past 2 years, we actually ran a small 20-family CSA, and this year, because we were very land insecure, we didn't run a CSA. So we don't have an official farm manager this year like we had last year, so now it is just completely led by whatever people are interested in planting. If they're someone's interested in seeing something particular, like this last picture, upper right-hand corner, where the vegetables are painted on the wall, that's some hops. So they're not really vegetable, but for brewing beer. But you know, one of our regular volunteers is interested in doing that, and so we certainly were willing to let him have the space for it. And you'll see here, you know, tomatoes, and there's some basil and center row peppers. We use, for especially those longer season crops, either black plastic or black landscape fabric, also like Cindy had mentioned. Let's see. So I think there's just some pictures of harvesting. Here is just a little event that we had, which you see happening at an urban farm. I wanted to just mention also a garden that we're helping start at Glencliff High School, and Glencliff is in South Nashville. They actually took up their tennis courts and are planting a garden, and so we're helping sort of facilitate that. And they had a greenhouse already in the site, and so it was a really amazing sort of place to start. There was just a photo from the newspaper, and here's a shot of them in the greenhouse. We actually had them starting all the transplants. It's really, you know, it's a really, I think, great way for the kids to take sort of what they're learning in biology class and see it just go from seed to sprout, seedling to plant that they plant outside. So I can answer more questions about the Glencliff thing a little bit after, but just to breeze through, we are involved in some more advocacy and public policy things in Nashville. One of the issues that we dealt with about a year and a half, or I guess a year ago, was it came to our attention when we were looking for land in case we had to move the community farm, was that farming in the Urban Services District was not actually allowed. You had to have a lot of larger than 5 acres and actually outside of the Urban Services District. So you had to be in the General Services District of Nashville, which is sort of, if you don't have garbage pickup, then you're in the General Services District, to be able to grow food and sell it in the city. And so we worked with several members of the City Council to change the rule, and it was organized through Community Food Advocates, which was then Food Security Partners, sort of brought together a lot of different stakeholders and looked at legislation all around the country. You know, that was put through that bill, sort of banning urban agriculture in the 70s, and there wasn't, from what we could tell, very much of an uproar. And, you know, no one was opposed to it on the City Council, and nobody really was opposed to it in Nashville, from what we heard, because if someone is growing vegetables on their property, the chances are they're just growing it for themselves and they are maybe giving it to their neighbors. But if someone, say, lost their job and has a half an acre and wants to do value-added mushroom production or something like that in a way that doesn't disturb their neighbors, you know, already CSAs sell out in Nashville. You know, there is much more local food available, but there can be more local food available. And so our opinion was, you know, if someone is interested in, say, beekeeping or keeping chickens or doing mushroom cultivation, do we want them to move to Cheatham County where they can afford 5 acres to start up a small farm, or do we want to let them, you know, try to do what they're interested in, which might be hobby right now, but might later turn into a full-time job or at least income stream. So really, how can we reduce those barriers in the city to make sure that that innovation stays in the city? Less non-controversial, or more controversial, is an urban chicken bill that is sort of at a, not a complete standstill right now, but chickens are officially not allowed in Nashville, or at least that's the way that the code, Metro Codes reads right now. But the Board of Zoning Appeals has sort of, for the time being, stopped enforcing actions against chicken owners, and we are working, for about a year, we've been working on a chicken bill. So the goal is to get 6 laying hens allowed in the city and 0 roosters, so no one will be woken up by their neighbors, you know, rooster crowing. I actually live right now up in northwest Nashville in the General Services District, and we are allowed to have chickens, so I have 6, and it's really great to have, and my sisters always have to come up to my house when they want to hang out with the chickens, but I hope one day that they can also have chickens in their house. So, you know, if someone wants to get involved with that or has chickens, there are a ton of people that actually do have chickens in the city, so it's not so, you might not even know about it, which is good actually. This is just a couple more details. I wasn't exactly sure what everyone else was going to talk about, so just talking about the fuel consumption and CO2 production from comparing sort of chain-bought food to local farm food. And this was one case study from Iowa, it's not the same everywhere, that showed food bought from local growers traveled only 56 miles as compared to about 1,500 miles. The thing I did want to touch upon was something called the local multiplier effect. If you spend $1 at a locally owned business, 45 cents on that dollar is reinvested in your community beyond just the dollar that you spend. So they're paying wages to their employees, they're paying local taxes, they're buying services with a higher chance that they're buying the services from other local businesses, so it keeps multiplying the effect of that dollar. Whereas if you are spending it at a larger chain that is not owned by Tennessee's company or a Nashville company, only 15 cents of that dollar is reinvested, and that's primarily in the form of wages, which may or may not be high depending on what kind of store you're shopping at. And so that is money that has a multiplied impact on the economy. So one of the things that we really can say is when you're shopping at the farmer's market or going to Delvin Farms, you know, they are paying their employees, and all those employees live around the Nashville area, and those people are also shopping at locally owned businesses. Not all locally owned businesses, but much more. So leading to a healthier and more prosperous community. And this just kind of goes to show a little bit of the statistics of how that money increases if we spend more and more of our percentage of our dollar locally. I will skip this for now just to go through it all, but this is just some contact information for groups to get involved with. I can put the slide back up later. Community Food Advocates is more of a coalition of both advocacy and sort of hands in the dirt or in the market or wherever it might be out in the community. And then Grow Nashville is specifically a website that shows community gardens, and then our contact information for Nashville Urban Harvest, which is .org. That's me. Just really briefly, I grew up in New York actually, so this is why it's for New York State, but this just touches on the comparison between eating vegetables and eating a meat-based diet, and actually what this research came out with was that if you eat a diet of a little bit of perennial, mostly cultivated crops, so mostly vegetables, but a little bit of meat in the form of dairy and in the form of sort of a low number of ounces, they're actually saying 63 grams of meat per day, which would be like a gram is 28 grams to 1 ounce, so like a little bit more than 2 ounces, I guess. You are able to be sort of the most friendly for the environment. So some people are vegetarian for the fact that it uses sort of it takes more land to raise meat. This study showed that since there are some areas that are not suitable for cultivated crop production, maybe are only suitable for hay production or are only suitable for pasture, for say dairy or pasture for meat production, that's actually potentially the most efficient form of food that you can eat, preferably local if you can. And I'll just end with this quote from Thomas Jefferson: "Cultivators of the earth are the most valuable citizens. They are the most vigorous, the most independent, the most virtuous, and they are tied to their country and wedded to its liberty and interest by the most lasting bonds." Thomas Jefferson. So, thank you. I obviously really like local farmers. I'm thrilled to be in the company of them. I don't farm for a full-time job. My sister and I have a business together, but have been really influenced by it, and our businesses very tightly related with local farmers, and so it's good to sort of be promoting local